Again, thanks for coming to the Utah Go meetup. My name is Carson Anderson. I co-host it here with Brandon, so we sort of trade off. You might see him up here sometimes, you might see me up here sometimes. I'm just gonna go ahead and blaze through some stuff and give most of our time to Clint. We don't have a lot of housekeeping stuff that we about. One bit of information, these little square things above your heads are the microphones. They're really good. They don't look like it, but they zoom in on sound to make sure you're heard on the call. So I'm not saying don't talk, but I'm saying like it's being recorded and you might be surprised how good your whispers come through in the recording.
And for the remote people, they can hear you.
They can hear you really well, yeah.
Carson, I'm not sure if your slides are showing up.
Oh, did I? No,
They were.
it looked like it was shared, right?
It was.
There it goes. There you good.
I think it's just super lagged. That's great.
It's whispered.
Yeah, look at that.
That's
Hold on.
what happened
Gonna-
last time.
I locked my screen.
We should see if we can find some techie people to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, we should get a room full of like programmers and maybe they'll know how to use them.
Well, they're added on this.
Presentation software.
We have it.
Okay. It's fine. I don't have a lot of slides. We'll just move super slow. We have our Forge Utah Slack, which there's invites for that along the bottom. If you're into that sort of thing, we're on there all the time being sassy. I always specifically point out there are jobs and hiring channels out there. So I know things are kind of be for a lot of people. That's a good place to outsource. The Kubernetes meetup, Paul usually opens it up for people that are hiring, but I'll never do that here. So I like to keep things
Whatever you want.
slim and smooth. So use those channels. Those are the best place to post that stuff anyway. If you want to come speak here, I would highly encourage it. I would love to see more people that I've never seen before speak. You can go submit on papercall.io. Still going the wrong
That's what was happening last time with Paul.
sharing. I hope this is better for you, Clint.
Uh-oh.
And that was when
We're
I
gonna
was
fix it.
sharing the screen over the Google Meet.
And then read these kids with that.
Put your hand, I want to see. Oh, I think you- oh, the lights are on.
No, that's the screen share that seems to like be
A
ridiculous.
little bit better. All right, so there is this papercall.io/Utah GoLang. That is where you can go to submit to speak here. You can also just go at Android or post in the Go channel on Slack and say, I want to speak. We are really open to all different qualities, all different experience levels. You do not have to be a super expert in the thing that you're talking about. In fact, it's often great to get a perspective of somebody that's not super familiar, or maybe focused in on a very specific part of Go. If you have ideas, I always say like, I have a policy of, if you want to talk, I'm going to get you up here talking. It may not be for the whole thing, both for your benefit and just to make that barrier to entry lower, but we'll get you up here. Maybe it's a lightning talk, maybe it's split 50-50 with somebody else, but like, we'll work with you. All talks accepted. So please come up here and speak to us. And that's it. That's all I have for housekeeping. I'm gonna turn everything over to, we were talking about it earlier. I wanted to say the prodigal son. Father, because he's the one that is the only reason I'm even up here, both at the company and at these meetups. And that's Clint. So he's still founder of Forge and keeper of the feast and
Technically founder of Weave even. if
yeah,
it
founder
is.
of Weave. I mean, fun. We're gonna talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. We seriously here at Weave, which is really out of his vision as well. Which is generation, proto first design. I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm really excited. This is the way to do things.
Don't get too excited.
No, I'm excited. It's too late. I'm hyping you so hard that,
Gosh.
all right, so take it away, Clint.
Thank you. Prodigal father. He's returned. Way too much hype.
And I gotta give
Play
you,
the fatted lamb.
every speaker gets all the stuff going. Thanks
Nice.
to.
This is a great touch.
Yeah, thanks to Go Meetup.
Yeah, that's, we got them for Go West, but you know, this is the appropriate use for him, I believe. Clint, do you have a gopher? It's your first plush gopher.
No, not my first plush gopher, but this one looks different than the last one I
Oh,
had.
they changed the model.
Yeah, this is great. So it's my first one of this edition.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Carson. Like I said, he's a hype master, but I do love Carson. I met Carson. I don't think I've ever told him this, but so I met Carson at Utah Kubernetes group. That's the first time I ever met you. And some dude was presenting on some topic, and Carson kept correcting him because he kept saying things that were wrong. And I'm like, dude, that guy's such a jerk up there. Just let the dude present. And I remember talking afterwards, and we're like, I'm like, Carson, I don't know if I could hire that guy. And Derek was like, I'd hire that guy in a second. Because he like knows his stuff. And like we talked about it more. And of course I got to know you. And one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and a great person, and ended up lucky enough to get to hire you. So Carson's incredible. Thank you for everyone who comes to these meetups. Like you could be anywhere on this night, and you chose to come here. So I really appreciate that. And for the remote people that are joining as well, you could spend this hour any way you wanted. And so I always just have to express appreciation. Especially there's a lot of people here. If you came to learn something, if you're new to this topic, I hope you'll get something out of it. But one of the best things about coming to these meetups is there's a whole slew of people that come to these meetups to help others learn. Just seasoned veterans that you can learn from here. And they sacrifice their time because they believe in community and they believe in helping others. So thank you to all of you who do that. This is not going to be salesy. I hope it doesn't come across that way, but I do want to give you all context for the decisions that we made at Kala. And so to do that, I want to give you a little bit of the background on why we built Kala, and I'm not going to dive deeply into the product features at all, but mention some of the product features so you understand our thought process. Our history was here. I mentioned I was one of the co-founders of Weave. I love this place. I love the building. I only got to work here for a couple months and it was empty. I was by myself on the 4th floor. Where was the engineer? 5th floor? I think we're on the 5th floor. Is there a 6th floor?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I was on the 5th floor, just by myself for a couple months before ended up leaving. But just half my apparel, if you see is still Weave. Pretty much every jacket. Brandon loved buying the employees' jackets. So I have tons of nice jackets. Here's kind of the content I'm gonna go through. I want to give you a little bit of my history at Weave, and Jason, who's my co-founder, he's in the back, Jason Newman. He was the chief architect at Weave. Talk about why we built Kala. I want to talk about why design first, and give you a little bit of context there and say why we think that's important. And then lastly, I'm going to go through our implementation of this design first methodology using GRPC, Protobufs, and generators, and show you some of the examples of the tooling that we use. For Weave people, a lot of this stuff's going to be review. We structured it in the way we knew. Right? It was the way we designed it at Weave. Although you'll see the tooling is way behind what Weave has in a lot of cases because Weave has a developer experience team constantly building tooling for the entire department. So to give you some context here on our history, at Weave, it's a communication platform, right? We have a phone system, we have texting, and if you think about those two offerings, they're really a commodity, right? There's phone companies galore, there's texting companies galore, and really the only way Weave was special from a product standpoint was that it integrated, the first few years with only dental software. We integrated with dental software. That's what made it special, was the integration. And so when one of our customers had a patient call in, our stuff would pop up with all the patient information that we synced because of our integrations, right? And so while I was at Weave, we built over 90 different integrations to different CRMs. That includes different versions of different CRMs as well. In vertical-based software, in dental, in health, all over the place, and just but almost all exclusively vertical-based software integrations. Most were on premise, actually. So it's interesting to see in the healthcare industry, especially just how legacy it can be, and a lot of on-premise software you can manage, and like we have to deal with installers and that type of thing. Most didn't have documentation, most didn't have APIs at all, and most of it sucked, to be quite honest. And so when Jason and I started talking about what we wanted to build after we left Weave and we were discussing what we wanted to do, we kept coming back to these integrations. And I remember Jefferson Lyman, who was the chief product officer here, who was my boss for a few months before that. When I told him what we were building, he's all, so you took the crappiest, hardest part of Weave and decided to make a company up from it? I was like, yeah, I guess so. And he just started laughing at me. Because this is the hard part. Right? I left, we had 2 full integration teams, and it's not like they're cranking out new integrations every week. There was a lot of maintenance, right, to deal with when you're dealing with non integrations. So it's hard work. And we decided that we were going to do that for Kala. Really what drives us though, what drove us at Weave, what still drives us at Kala is we love helping businesses excel. And so our mission at Kala is we want to give businesses access to the best software possible to help them run their businesses. And the way we do that is through integrations. These businesses expect when they get software that it's just going to work with all their stuff. They are not tech savvy. And when it doesn't work with their stuff, with their practice management system or whatever, it's super frustrating for them, especially for small businesses. And Jason and I both come from parents who ran small businesses, and we grew up in that generation where, you know, we had middle school without cell phones and high school with cell phones, and like technology just changed while we were in coming of age. And we got to help because we were interested in programming. Jason had a programming job in high school. We got to help our parents' businesses in some cases because we knew how to program, which is awesome. So now we're just trying to scale that up and help as many businesses as possible. So our approach is we have this 2-pronged approach at Kala. And one of the first part is how do we help companies like Weave integrate better and easier with software that's difficult to integrate with. That's the first approach. That's what our product that we built that's categorized as an iPaaS. We've heard that one. It's an integration platform as a service. That's one thing that we built. And then we have the other side of it, which is going to these software companies, like demo software companies, and saying, let us help you expose APIs so that others can integrate with you more easily. That's our developer portal product. And so underneath those, you have little things like we have an API generator for companies like a Dentrix that don't have APIs or they're stored procedures in their database. That's their API. We have a way to generate a REST API from their data, right? So API heavy. We have an API gateway that we can put in front of APIs that they do have to manage third-party data access, those type of things. On the iPaaS side, we have to do API mediation to transform APIs into a unified system that people can integrate with. And so ultimately what it came down to when Jason and I were discussing this, you need me?
No.
Oh, Josh is waving at me for a
Leave the
second.
door to get open.
Oh, thanks, Josh. Is we knew we were going to be an API heavy company, like APIs everywhere. And that meant we had to be very deliberate on the path we chose for building those APIs. And so that's that path that we chose, we're going to present to you today, starting with why we chose to do design first. Why design first? I'd say the first thing, and in my early days of Weave, I've severely underestimated the value of consistency in an API. If you look at, and I'm sure it's fixed by now, but if you looked at Weave APIs, probably 5 years in still, maybe 6 years, 7, maybe 8. We still had a whole bunch of different ways to do pagination. We still had a whole bunch of ways to do filtering, and depending on the team and depending on the API, which can be super frustrating, right? When you're a new developer, you come into Weave and you're like, oh, I need to go consume something from the integrations team. And it's like, oh, wait, what? Your pagination is different than the rest of the system? Like, this is weird. So, and I now have come to realize how much speed you get out of a consistent API. And taking an API design first really helps you be deliberate in consistency. Obviously, you don't have to do this methodology to have a consistent API. All of these whys that I'm going to talk to you about are just, the method is helpful to get you there. It helps you be more consistent. Security, which is one I didn't think about, but in the early days, but designing your API first kind of helps you shift the security. I don't know if you overuse shifting security left, but it lets you look at the security implications of an API before any code is started. Like, what data is this returning? What does this contract look like? What do we need to do to this endpoint to make it more secure? Efficiency. This has been so awesome for us at Calla, where at first you're like, oh, you have to go design your API and design your contract first. That's adding overhead, isn't it? Then when you just go code it. But what happens is when you design it first and then everyone agrees upon it, back end and front end, they're off to the races. They're developing at the same time. Tests get auto-generated. Like you have a bunch of tooling that help when you have a contract for API contract. So the efficiency just skyrockets, I feel like, when you do API design first. And then lastly is collaboration. I love having an API manifest that every developer in the company can understand, including front end or back end. They all can go in and audit it. They all can put comments on it, and anyone can contribute to it. We often have our front end engineers go in and design APIs that they would like to see implemented, right? Or, if we have a feature that we're trying to build and Jason and I are, the front end engineers will go say, hey, here's how we think the API should look. Will you guys comment on it? And it just creates this process of everyone understands this central manifest and we can work on it together. So collaboration has been awesome as well. So now that you have a lot of the context on Calla and the whys, I want to show you some of the hows. And my presentation, just so everyone's aware, my presentation is about a half hour, and then I have a discussion list of questions that I'm actually going to ask you guys, because I want your genuine feedback on things that maybe we don't know about, technology I don't know about, that we could have used in our decision making. What decisions do you feel like that maybe we made that were crappy, or especially knowing that we're a brand new startup? Anyway, we can handle the feedback. So if you're thinking of things, present them, like take a note of them, because I want to hear them. We have thick skin, at least we do now. So the first thing that we have to do when this kind of a little bit, huh? The first thing that we do when we're going to implement is we have to pick what we're going to use for our manifest, right? What are we going to use to define the contracts? And there's a lot of options out there. We looked at just using open API. I guess I should start with our goal, right? Our goal was we wanted to be able to write definitions by hand, and we wanted them to be very readable. Those were two goals that we wanted. As we looked at the open API spec and tried to execute by hand, we quickly realized that was going to suck. That is a fool's errand if you're going to write API specs by hand with open API. So we knew that wasn't probably going to be our source of truth. We looked at API Builder, which is open source, but ultimately didn't have nearly the adoption of the other two options which we looked at, which Open API and Protobuf and GRPC, and ultimately settled on Protobuf and GRPC because it's really intuitive. At least we definitely are biased because we had experience with Protobufs, but we felt like Protobufs were readable and you could write them by hand and define an API, and so we went with it. GraphQL was definitely an option, right? GraphQL has some amazing scheme. You can design your schema in GraphQL. It auto documents when you write those schemas, which is really cool. We knew we were going to be dealing with third parties a lot, especially third parties that maybe weren't seasoned engineers. If you're looking in some of these spaces, like hopefully no one worked for this company. The odds are super low, but like one of our early customers that we got a letter of intent from is a company called Cycle. And
No, no.
that would be crazy. They're just this little audiology practice management software company. I can't remember, they're somewhere in California, right? Somewhere in California. But it's super legacy software and they have like a team of engineers that really just, they don't come to meetups. Let's just put it that way. And we knew, at least Google claims that 80% of public APIs are REST-based or REST style APIs. We tried to pick a path that would be most familiar to developers that were maybe a little bit more junior. So we ended up picking a more resource-driven REST style API that would be more familiar. So that's one of the reasons why we picked it. So after we picked GRPC, then we had to come up with a way to say, what's our style guide? How are we going to enforce consistency? Because even with GRPC and Protobufs, you can still go in and do whatever you want and name endpoints, whatever you want, and really get out of control really fast. And this is one where I'm not really sure, and maybe at the end of this, if anyone is aware, like what kind of API style guides are out there open for people to consume. Obviously, we looked at Buff, which is a really popular product for protos and has its own kind of linter and basic style guide for writing protobufs. But we wanted something that was even more prescriptive. And even if we didn't love every prescription, we knew that the consistency was so important as we were writing APIs that we just wanted that prescription. And if something existed out there, we wanted it. And we ended up finding these Google AIPs, which is the most confusing acronym because they just switched the P and the I, but the AIP actually stands for API Improvement Proposals. So yeah, I don't know who the guy was that came up with that, the person that came up with that, but they should go on PIP. Because that just made everyone's life super confusing. And when you Google AIP, like Google automatically corrects it. Didn't you mean API? It's like, no, I'm actually looking for AIPs. So we came across this and it was actually really incredible. It was exactly what we were looking for from an opinion side. And so I'm going to show you kind of what it gives you. First is if you come in, they publish all of their internal AIPs that they use at Google. And this is their long style guide of requirements for building APIs at Google. These are all like rule sets that you're going to do. So like an example, resource names. How do you, not names, that's probably not the good one. It's confusing. How do you write get methods in this for Google APIs? And they actually have a linter that I'm going to show you here that enforces these AIP rules. So let me. Show you. It doesn't take too long. Oh, nice. Since it was already built, it went fast. Okay, so just using a code space here on Google with our, still setting up. This is our schema centralized repo, and I'm just going to quickly create a resource, and I'm going to show you some of the features of. Okay. So if I was going to create a quick resource in our developer program API, I have a little CLI tool I built because I hate even writing all the get, post, all the different. So I just wrote a little thing. Do the version v1, and we'll create a resource called foo. And so what that does is that comes into our program API, and it created this foo proto file. Is that big enough to see?
I can see it. We can turn the lights on.
In the back? Go this a little smaller.
More glare for me. I don't know about anybody else.
Is that helpful?
I don't, better.
So that generator just simply went through and created the service foo and created a get, list, create, update, delete foo functions, and also just created the foo object, right? And with some very bare minimum stuff. And so if I run the linter on this, it should pass. Because generated code should pass the linter, and it did, thank goodness. And now let's say I want to delete, I want to add a delete time to this object and store it on there. I'm gonna just store it as a string because I don't want to think about dates or anything like that. So I'm just gonna do delete time equals 4. And I'm just gonna go lint it and see if that, what it does. What it's gonna return, all the ways that this new property has failed matching those AIPs. And so the first one is, hey, if you have time, so it looked at time, it sees time in the name and says, no, that's not supposed to be a string. That's supposed to be a timestamp. Change it to a timestamp. It also has standard rules for doing delete time, which is kind of cool. So it should say, hey, if you're a delete time, the field behavior should be output only. You can never set the delete time, right? It's only when you delete that should be set. And then lastly, it says you need a comment, right, over it all. And so if I was to go fix that really quick, I'll just copy and paste the one that works. This is what the definition should look like to pass the linter. You can see the annotation over here. The field behavior says it's output only. Now I pass the linter. As another example of where, what's funny is as we implemented this linter and this AIP rule, these rules, is so many times I would go create custom methods or property names, and I would fail the linter, and when it would come back and I'd see what's failed, I'm like, oh, that's actually really awesome that it didn't let me do that. And so here's like an example where, hey, we want some consistent naming. So let's say I wanted to added an error message for some reason to a property. So I'm going to put reason for error, and I'm going to create a string called reason for error and leave it like that. And now I'm going to run it through the linter. And it says, it even gets frustrated with me at using the preposition for. You're like, what the heck? Am I not supposed to use prepositions? And so it references the rule. I'll open it up so you can see it. Takes you to the API linter documentation, and then also lets you click on the actual AIP itself so you can see why it's failing. And you come in here and you'll see, oh, field names will show up eventually. How am I supposed to name fields? And it tells you how you're supposed to name fields. Then it gets to the preposition section. It's like, no, we don't write reason for error. You're supposed to call it error reason. And we've loved this so much for consistency. It's been incredible. One more thing that I'll show from this linter that I love is every once in a while, you just need to break the rules of the linter, right? It's like, I need to call it reason for error because that's why I need to. And so you can actually put a comment in front of it like this and says, hey, this rule, core 140, which came out down here, see it down at the bottom, is disabled. And we need to do this because of a reason. And then you will pass the linter. We try to do it rarely, but sometimes yes.
Is that disabled only for that one line? Or-
Yes, just that one property. It only disables it so that the comment applies to that property. You can put this comment above like a message. In some case, so it will disable it for the entire message. You can put it in front of a service, so it'll disable it for the entire service.
So the whole block it comes before?
Yeah, I can't remember if you can put it in front of a whole file. I'd have to look at that. But we tried to not go that far. We typically only do it on, one property at a time and sparingly. So that's been awesome. The other thing that I think is really cool is if you go back to their AIP homepage, they have a whole section here, want to use AIPs for your organization. This entire website is open source and you can fork it. And so we actually have our own aip.kala.dev. And this is our version of the AIPs. Sorry, I keep forgetting that it takes a while to show up. And we added a section over here. They give you a range of numbers for the rules that you can use for your own. And so for us, we added a couple for standard field codes. Which we want to make sure we have a create time, update time, and then potentially a delete time and expire time on every resource. And so we expect at least the first two. Put an example. We followed all our guidance on creating an AIP, including a change log, using the should, and all of this is defined in Markdown. Super awesome. And then they have a renderer for you. Another one we did is we added some extra open API functionality in the comment above RPC to help with documentation generation, so that it was a little bit nicer. So this has been incredible. We've loved it. So that's some API linter examples. Moving on, after we've defined our style guide, which we did with AIPs, we implemented a whole slew of generators. And this is one of the big reasons why we picked GRPC, is because the amount of generators, especially for Go, which is the language we're using, obviously, and we're in the Go meetup, is really robust. In fact, if you go to the awesome, you don't have it pulled up anymore, but if you go to like GRPC Awesome, which has a list of cool utilities, there's a whole section of Go on, and it's really long. I followed along, which is great. So here's just a few of the ones that we use. Protoc Gen Go, of course, which generates your objects and models. Then you have the GRPC one, of course. Those are all standard. Go JSON actually implements a marshaller and unmarshaller on your structs that it generates, which is great. A company, Jason, what's the name of the company? Einride, some random company created Protoc Gen Go AIP, which has been so awesome for us. And Jason's actually worked it and put some additions into it to help further it. And he actually reached out to them and said, hey, do you accept? And they're just like, nah, we just published it for fun, which is great. Like they're helping other companies out. They don't want to maintain a community project. That's fine. But this implements like pagination and filtering from the way that AIP is expected to be done, implements it for you on your gRPC methods, which is so awesome. So a huge win. Jason actually changed it. They had it for what database? Was it for? Spanner. Yeah, they built it for Spanner, and Jason changed it to work for MySQL so that we could use PlanScale with it. Protoc Gen Validate, which is a good one. If you're not familiar with this ecosystem, Protoc Gen Validate was written by Lyft, and you'll see some things in here like this display name has validate.rules.string. It says, hey, there's a min length of 3, a max length of 30. Those validators will get automatically generated in Go in your implementations for you and will automatically validate when they come in, which is a huge win as well when you're defining your API contract to have those just automatically work. And I believe they get generated client and server side. Does that sound right, Jason? At least for the gRPC stuff, not for the HTTP, but for the gRPC stuff, I believe it happens on the client and the server, which is so cool. And then lastly is the Protoc Gen gRPC gateway. I mentioned earlier that we really wanted to create a REST style API because that's what people are most familiar with. gRPC out of the box is an RPC style API, right? And doesn't even work over from the browser out of the box. And so gRPC gateway puts a proxy in front that translates it to a more REST style API, and that generates that for you. Great. Some other custom or modified generators that we use, the Gnostic, which also comes from Google, Protalk Gen Open API. This generates an Open API manifest from your proto definitions. And then the reason why we like having that is there's a whole slew of tooling that works with Open API that now we have access to. And one of those, for instance, is our automated documentation generation. And so whenever we make a change to our schema repo, which is our API manifest, it automatically updates our docs. And you can see even we added this to the generator, but it adds the validation. So our generator Protalk, which is still open source if you ever want to use it, will generate Open API manifest and supports Protalk Gen validate. It translates that over to the Open API spec as well, so that your documentation has those values in it. So you can see like that's supposed to be 1 to 1,000 or whatever. So that's also, yes.
Do you have documentations similar to this, but on the GRPC side?
No.
Okay.
We actually don't, anything that we expose, we don't publish the GRPC endpoints to our customers. The clients themselves, like our Go client, will use GRPC behind the scenes, but that's just transparent to them. They don't know.
Okay.
Doesn't use the browser. The front end framework has to use, the front end SDK has to use the browser. So that uses the web ones. It also auto generates the TypeScript types from that automatically as that all happens. And then lastly, which is this actually a step removed and a little bit out of the scope, but Jason created a custom generator that now like wires up some of the CRUD stuff to a database, which is pretty awesome. And so he even has it generate most of the implementation of the APIs, at least for the create, update, and delete stuff. Okay. What else was I going to show you? Maybe that was it. I wanted to open this up to discussion so you could see, these are the kind of questions that I wanted to ask all of you. We have some really seasoned developers in here. Put yourself in my shoes and Jason's shoes and say, you're starting this startup. You have this desire to build a company that's going to be heavily dependent on APIs. What decisions do you feel like after seeing that basic architecture setup, like could we have done better? Or was it even, like, I'd love to hear if you feel like that was overkill for even a startup. Maybe that was too far. I'm just curious. Did anyone have any like feedback come to their head while they were watching this?
Julie had a question we get by earlier. She asked, well, if you considered twerp as an alternative to GRPC?
Twerp? No, I didn't, and I don't know what it is.
It's Protobufs, but for Twitch, they're specific, like the Leo. No.
What's the advantage to using twerp? Is it like faster?
It's essentially the same direction as like Buff Connect, but done much earlier and by Twitch for their needs. So it's not really like a standard that they were trying to say everybody should use. They just open sourced it, but it's quite interesting.
Does it use proto manifest or is it a completely different manifest file to like define your API?
Yeah, you're using Protos.
So use protos.
Yeah.
Julie will ask the question.
Julie's got a, go ahead, Julie.
Maybe.
You're on mute.
We have 2 hand raises.
That's because Julie's on there twice.
You can ask with either of your personas.
Yep.
Split personality, it's all good.
And how they like to duplicate people.
Yeah.
Google Meet's fantastic.
Sorry, I'm just having trouble technically. But the main advantage of using twerp, I think, would be that if you needed to use it over HTTP 1.1 instead of HTTP 2, which was a need at my company.
Got it. Okay, so it's similar to, like you said, Buff Connect or gRPC Gateway to an extent where it will
Yeah. Just like
translate.
years ago instead.
Okay.
It's actually quite nice. I tried to play with it, but their getting started guides and whatnot are, the community is just lacking, and that's fine. Like, that's not what their purpose was, but it's good tech, and I think Buff Connect is gonna fulfill that need for the community rather than Twitch.
I'll take a look at it. I just did a Buff Connect proof of concept yesterday, actually, just messing around, and it was pretty cool. It definitely feels still, and I think that's the intent, it's an RPC style API over the web, which is fine, and there's a lot of benefits to that. It does make your URLs look really funny if you're used to a REST style implementation. Again, totally fine. We're just dealing, our intent was to at least expose a REST style API that was more or less what people were used to, at least in the industry we're in. But that doesn't mean we won't do both, which is one of the cool benefits of having this manifest first, is we run the gRPC server on a different port, and you can hit the gRPC stuff, the APIs, as well as the gRPC gateway web APIs. We can do the same thing with Connect. Connect will support gRPC standard and gRPC Connect protocol over the web if you want, right? And so we can just run that in tandem, and it's really not a lot of overhead for us to manage, which is really cool. I'm guessing Torque would be probably the similar way. We could run it alongside gRPC gateway.
Yeah. Just a question on your linter. Does it have the ability to implement just fixes?
Usually no. Like meaning like what you should change it to, like for.
Yeah, like it makes all the.
Like where I said reason for error, and it's just like, hey, you can't use for. It doesn't say hey, try using error reason instead. I haven't seen it say that.
We'll fix it for you.
Doesn't fix it for you, but you could wire it up to ChatGPT. And I'm sure it will do it for you.
You do for things that your customers can do with HTTP that just don't have equivalents in gRPC.
Like file uploads.
Like file uploads.
Yeah, we copied Google's methodology there, so we have an endpoint that says, hey, give me an upload URL, a unique upload URL, and so that's how we implement it. You hit the gRPC endpoint to say, give me the URL to upload a file, and that is for that specific file. Like we'll say upload icon, give me the icon upload URL, and then you upload the icon to it and it goes to the right place.
And so that's some other service that's doing a file upload handling for you.
Yeah, Jace, how did you implement that part of it?
The file uploads are all just signed URLs
From GCP?
from GCP.
Oh, yeah, so we're just passing it through.
Throw it in
in
there. Okay.
some instances, there's a couple places where in gRPC gateway, we register a HTTP endpoint that's just totally different, separate. So we intercept, we peel off some routes at the gRPC gateway layer that are REST or not supported on gRPC at all.
We do the same thing. I was just wondering if you had something smarter than us, but.
I wish there was something smarter, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to adding new rules to your AIPs, do you have to crank and hand implement the enforcement? on the-
Yeah, you do.
Okay,
Yeah, so you have to fork the AAP linter and add it.
okay. How hard is that?
I can't, I think it's in Python. It's not bad. He's like, yeah. Not bad. It's not too bad.
For the CRUD generator, what do you use to like drive that? Is it the database schema or do you have to input a bunch of crap?
So we actually use the proto schema as the basis to generate the SQL. So we take the object, like in that case, I had the foo object, and then Jason created a custom generator that takes that object and generates SQL from it with a configuration file. We debated, and one thing that I implemented as a pilot at Weave is actually annotating the objects with SQL specific stuff. What ended up happening is I got so annotation happy that the proto file got almost unreadable because it would be like adding the I would add an index to a field in the annotation, and then you had the validation on the field, and it just ended up being like every field had all these annotations, and it made it too far, in our opinion. So what we did this time instead is this special generator, which is a step after the gRPC generation, is Jason created a configuration file specifically for it, where he says, this property has these indexes, or don't generate database for this property. So it's a separate config file. Yeah.
So in your design first approach, how do you manage the comments that you said that then you kind of publish it internally and then people can comment on it? How do you manage, like, where do they comment and?
Yeah, so we do it all in GitHub. And so our manifest is its own repo. And so all the API changes to that repo happen there. And I think Jason even has alerts on it because sometimes when I make a change, he's like, hey, what are you doing? And I'm like, I didn't know I did that. And so that's how we manage it. And so it's all in GitHub comments on a pull request.
So I'm curious, you mentioned you kind of went in with a junior dev first approach, like let's make this simple and standard. How much pushback do you get from developers for like a really strict linting system, and like how do you deal with devs that are like, they want to do it their way and don't like the new standard?
Yeah, I mean, we have 4 developers, that includes me and Jason, so we don't run into that yet. But I think as we grow, and you have to come up with your engineering manifesto, right? At some point, you're gonna get big enough where you're like, hey, if we're getting outside of one team, now communication is harder. And so you have to kind of come up with your standards, your manifesto. And one of the things that I think we'll put in ours is consistency is paramount. Like we believe in making things consistent. Even if you come in and disagree with the way we're doing things, you can propose a change, but we're gonna make the change across the whole thing. And so we do it one way. And if you don't like that way, you can either deal with it or go. Like that's really what it's gonna come down to. And we'll be upfront when we're hiring. Like a lot of this stuff's public, like our AIPs, things like that will show everyone what we're doing. So they're not gonna be like shocked when they get in to be like, what is this garbage? And Jason and I run into things with AIPs, we're kind of like, this doesn't fit some of the stuff that we're doing. It's frustrating, but we love the consistency so much we deal with it.
Well, also, you can't like effectively run code generation without holding fast to that consistency. Like you can't be, if you're not leasing it with a linter, then it's just gonna break.
Yeah.
Because that's what code generation is all about.
I think you could, from a code generation perspective, I think you could get away with a buff linter and you'd be safe from a code generation standpoint. I think the AIPs take it even a step further and saying, you can't even name your properties a certain way, because that'll generate fine. Reason for error will generate fine. But we're saying, no, you cannot call it that. You have to call it something else. And so it's an even stricter layer on the style guide, which we're trying to enforce. But yeah, I agree. You have to at least have a small set of style guides to make generation possible. And Buff actually does a really good job of that.
You think, so I asked you this because we're doing it. You're going really heavy on Protobufs. And that means your brain starts to think in the context of how can I shape this into a Protobuf service? Like, how do you keep from like, that gives you tunnel vision, right? Like this is like Protobuf tunnel vision. And how do I keep myself from like?
Part of it though, I feel like is, as far as manifests go, it's pretty flexible.
Yeah.
And the fact that Go in particular has built some amazing tooling, like their updates that allow you to build proto generators that do incredible things really easily. It used to be that you had to use Lyft's Protalk Gen Star if you wanted to do anything because it was super difficult. But the Go now makes it so easy to build generators. And so you can just add custom annotations. Again, you have to be careful. You don't want to get crazy. But if you wanted to do something that was outside of the realm of Protobuf, you could make a custom annotation fairly trivially now and make it generate on the side. And one of the great things about Go when you're generating is you just throw in a different file and add it to the struct, right? And so you're not stepping on any files. You're not having to edit files. Just make a new one. Like Protalk Gen Validate creates a new file and just adds the validate function to the struct for the objects, which is great.
So that actually leads into another question that I had was like, you guys are building custom code generators, right? Like beyond just, it seems like piggybacking off of Go stuff, you're like generating SQL.
Yeah, one main one.
Yeah. So like what are some of the biggest pain points with building your own generator versus like going out and shopping for somebody else's, and like what are the best strategies for making that be successful?
One thing that I feel like the ecosystem is lacking is what we're trying to do is there's not a lot of like CRUD generators for the proto world. There's just not. Like I haven't found a framework that's like, yeah, start defining proto files for your API and we'll generate all your code for you like a Rails framework, right? If it exists, I haven't found it. And I've put a lot of hours, and I'll admit my Google Kung Fu's not like the best, but if anyone here knows of one that exists where it's like a proto manifest first, and then we're gonna have a framework around that, I would love it. But even like SQL C, like it was hard. At Weave, I was trying to break this in to go from proto CRUDs to implementing a SQL C interface, and it was super difficult. And I think they've made updates to SQL C now that they've segmented things that allow me to do that, because I wanted to share the objects, the proto objects with the SQL C objects. I didn't want to have to translate them, but they made it so impossible to do. And so if that ever existed, that would be one of the downfalls to doing this as a startup that I'll be open about, is if you're familiar with like Rails or Django, this is slower to get started. Because you had to write a generator. JSON's really fast, but if we would have started with Django, it would have just been there, right? We define your database schema and you get all your CRUD for free.
So basically your preference would be to not write the generator, but there's no option, basically, is where you're at.
I don't have an option for you. You either have to hand implement the functions, which isn't terrible, let's be honest, unless you have a lot of resources like we do. I don't know if you saw the docs, but we have 4 APIs up here and you can see these are all resources. That would have taken a long time to code by hand. It's just like, yeah, I'm glad Jason had the generator, but here's custom functions. Anyway. Yeah.
Auth. Just all of auth.
Oh, we just skipped that
Can we
part.
have one
At all?
slide about security, Todd?
I threw in the gratuitous slide about security just to like check the box.
It exists.
All our auth it's implemented manually.
Oh.
GRPC at the gateway level, is that where we're doing it?
Yeah,
You roll your own crypto?
no,
I think
it's found nothing that we love. We're using Google Identity Platform.
Yeah.
And then wiring that up with the middleware.
Jots.
So Jots, okay.
Don't love it.
So it's completely separate outside of all of these API endpoints. It's handled at GRPC gateway level and
Yeah, it's
no
not.
auth C whatsoever.
Well, to
I
give,
mean, there's saucy layered in there too, but
Okay.
it's.
you can do that. We do
Company.
that in our schema at Weave.
Mhm.
So we've got the similar things and we actually, when we generate your gateways, they always have auth in front of them all the time. And if you have public endpoints, we make you go to specific ones and like specifically declare them as
Yeah.
public. And like unauthed and like say auth disabled and make it scary in the proto. And we do, but it's all optional. It's all generators. So it's like, yeah, we do it, but we wrote generators to say, well, these
Jason
can be
put that into
CLs.
the generator as well, right? Like if you add an endpoint, it's just auth by default. You would have to specifically call out, here's the role, and then here's if you need this to be public, you put it as public. That's in the generator manifest that you create. Again, but that's custom rolled. And it's not on the manifest itself yet.
These are things that we run into in the same vein, and I wondered if you had something clever, but usually it's something, so with us, we don't generate the handlers. Because, oh, you're fine. Because the handlers have to be modified after the fact to add the auth, especially about C stuff, but sounds like you're doing the same. How do you update? Like, I change the API, do you regenerate and then just apply those patches, or do you try to keep them separate somehow?
So for like the CRUD stuff, like most of that generation can just change. Like he created a layer where there's an adapter layer, and that's where we like do the translation. So you may have to go change some stuff there.
Hmm.
But as far as like the actual implementation, like talking to the database, that's done through the generator.
So some of this is generated continuously and some of this is generated once and then you own it.
So we call if it's generated, you don't change the file. We have initializers that are editable.
Okay.
And
I
if
like
they
that.
exist, they won't get overwritten on a new initialization process or a new generation process.
Fair.
Have you had to do any nested or composite for those or types yet? That's where, so like audit log, hot specs and all that stuff. Figure out when you try to net those.
We do nested. You're just talking about nested types?
So like in Kubernetes, I want to make something that looks exactly like a deployment and requires a full pod spec. And now you hate yourself because how do you actually maintain two proto files? The one you made and the one you're referencing? Doesn't sync. It's audit log's another one that
I don't have an answer for that.
GRPC audit logs are just like, you have to like unwrap all these layers and try to turn it into something because it'd be one of three different things. It's painful. So you can get by just having really good APIs that don't do that.
That's
Want to
what we're
reference a
doing right
pod
now.
spec, you kind of have to.
Yeah, no, we haven't had to deal with that yet, and then obviously intentionally not doing any audits right now.
The other side of this is with auth and whatnot. The other problem we run into is fields that we actually want in the database, but we don't want it to go anywhere else. Like salted and hashed password manifests, we would like to never leave the database. We would like them to come in once and then never be exited.
So not even readable ever.
Well, I mean, it would be readable in whatever is validating you have logged in.
Yeah.
Now, that may not be a thing.
Internal service has to be able to.
But there are lots of other services that have fields like that. Password's just the most accessible option. There's always things.
Yeah, we have
the
a,
data, et
there's
cetera.
an input only annotation we use a lot. So that flags that it's like this can only, this data can only go in, can never go out. So then the generate code that forces that, and it'll clear the fields that are marked like that.
One-way validations, basically.
So Proto has some built-in ones that Google comes with. That's one of the ones that comes in as one of, in the
As the
Google
Google.
annotations.
I'm just trying to figure out how that works.
Yeah, and the generator has to support it. And so GRPC generators, does it support that one particularly, or do we have?
No, we had to add support for that.
So we had to add it.
So we look for that annotation specifically and apply rules to it.
It's also like we added immutable.
Output
Output only, a good one.
Showed that one.
Yeah, oh yeah, I did.
required.
Flyer, yeah, that's another one that's built in.
What's the development loop for people writing, modifying schemas or writing new ones? Like here you go, create a new one. What is your like?
Yeah, so they literally check out the repo, create a new branch, add what they need to add, submit a pull request, we comment on it. It automatically will run through all the winters and generate to make sure that there's nothing off. And then, yeah, if it passes and we all agree on it, then we approve it. So it's pretty simple.
Basically the same thing. Are you putting that generated code anywhere to actually like use it, or are you saying like you can't use the code till it's merged?
I don't know why Jason and I hate dependencies so much. I don't know if we got like traumatized as children or something, but we actually, so if, on the implementation side, if you're going to implement a manifest, and we have some unique cases where we have a certain manifest that gets implemented by a bunch of different services, we actually generate the Go code into that service. So it lives there as its own library. Because we don't want the dependency. And then we don't make backwards incompatible changes, obviously. That would break everything. Yeah.
So like if, obviously the SQL generation works great and you can do that, but let's say you really need to optimize your SQL. You gotta, make it faster, whatever. At that point, do you say, well, we stop auto generating this is hand rolled, or kind of what's the flow on that?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. We haven't gotten there yet because we have 3 customers. We have 3 customers.
That's better than nothing for how recent your startup's been.
Could be better. Better.
Those ask for static IPs for your API or banks in there asking for MTLS.
For that.
Most of our customers are super unsophisticated. They don't know that static IPs exist.
What's that?
Fortunately, you'll get a big fat contract.
Yeah, eventually,
It'll happen at some point.
someone's just like, I'm from 1970 and I need your static IP address.
You're not using the right cipher suites.
I'm looking forward to that day. That's fine. We'll deal with it when it happens, I guess.
Any more questions?
I have a spicy one after the recording stuff.
Handle it. Oh, you don't want it recorded for your sake, or?
No. You've sake.
He wants Forge to appear professional.
You guys still use, bulk tooling like backwards breaking changes and stuff like that?
We haven't implemented it yet. We've just, since Jason and I are mostly the ones implementing everything, we just are very careful not to break backwards incompatibility.
Do you plan on implementing it?
Yeah,
Okay, and
absolutely.
you're probably just gonna use bus or, okay. Cool.
Does Buff have a way to check backwards compatibility?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it actually will go look at the previous branch or whatever you check. It'll check against main and say like, oh yeah, you broke this API in a backwards incompatible way, and then you can say it will pass. Which is great.
Cool. Well, thank you, Clint. I will start the recording and we'll do the spice. Smells the heat.
Have a spice sticker.
Spicy commentary.
Pull out whenever Todd do his thing.
Just like, cross your fingers like, oh.